All you have on Zoho is the absence of technical documentation, public statements on Twitter by its founder, Sridhar Vembu, who keeps saying that, please trust me, our business model is to keep your data safe. But these are assurances which cannot be verified. The IT rules are like a buffet in which the menu is added again and again, and the government can eat whatever it wants, how long it wants. Should air travel and DigiYatra be restricted to people who only have smartphones? So this kind of censorship which is happening, really, I think so, is instilling a level of fear in society. People self-censor a whole lot today because they worry not only about the legal consequences of what may happen, they also fear social exclusion and targeting. It's not just surveillance, it's just not the state wanting to know what you do, it's the state wanting you to be a certain way. I think the broad story which we are seeing unfold is of a lack of empathy which is there in our digital story. This infrastructure which we are building digitally as well, the same sense which is there with our physical infrastructure, that yes, it's shiny, it's new, but it's broken.
Government emails have now moved to Zoho. Twitter just lost its case against the government over censorship and takedown orders. And the already controversial IT rules are being tweaked yet again. India's digital landscape is evolving fast, but behind it lie big questions about data, privacy, and control. To unpack all of this, we're joined today by Apar Gupta, the co-founder of the Internet Freedom Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Apar. The union government has just proposed amendments to the IT rules. Could you break down the big changes for us?
There were two sets of changes, one which were proposed and one which were actually carried out. The ones which were proposed relate to labeling of artificial intelligence generated media, anything which is called synthetic, inauthentic. For instance, even text by ChatGPT or any kind of photo editing software. The concern which it seeks to address is the growing social alarm around deepfakes. And the second set of regulations which were actually carried out, not put to public consultation, is a parallel censorship regime which is called Syog. This is an online portal which has been created by the government, in which the government sends notices to any social media platform for takedown. And it doesn't have sufficient safeguards. It is done in secret, and there has been an exponential rise in the number of takedowns. For instance, there were a number of tweets, a number of videos when in February there was a stampede on the New Delhi railway station, and later out it turned out that this was the railway authorities itself sending these takedown orders through the Syog portal. I was listening to your introduction, changes happening at an exponential rate, and the regulations do seem to be finding their way more and more, which restricts a person's freedom.
So the changes, especially about the Syog app, can they be contested? Is there still a period to have them tweaked in a way by public consultation and stakeholders weighing in, such as yourself?
So there's no public consultation for the notification in the Gazette for the Syog rules. They take into effect though on November 15th, prior to which the Syog portal was drawing some bits of its legitimacy on the basis of office memorandums. And I'm not commenting on the case in the Karnataka High Court, which was ex-corp's challenge to this or to these official memorandums and the Syog portal, because I was acting as a lawyer for DigiPub. From a public policy perspective, if one looks at that regulation, now the government, and reads the news reports, the government is saying we have actually tightened it up. There are lesser number of people who can issue these kind of orders. It can't be somebody junior. It needs to be a DIG. Well, there are 8 police ranges in Gujarat, 18 in Uttar Pradesh. So there are 8 DIGs in Gujarat, there are 18 in Uttar Pradesh. And when you compare that to the pre-existing regime, which was there before Syog, these kind of requests were made to a central union ministry, which is the Ministry of Electronics and IT. So there was only one authority which would issue orders, but now you will be having hundreds of authorities. And the second safeguard they will be saying is that now to issue any order under Syog, these hundreds of authorities need to write a detailed order which will be reasonable, proportionate, but that order will never be shared. It will never be made public. So we don't get to know. You can't report on it. There won't be any scrutiny. But also the person who makes the post, for instance, it's a tweet which is censored. So the person who tweeted about that, even they don't get a notice that you have been censored due to this order and due to these reasons. Hence, these safeguards don't mean much if they are made and they only exist in secret in a way. And finally, they'll be saying that, oh, there's a review process which is there. So every month there's a review of all the blocking orders, but this review is done by the same authority which passes the order. So if the DIG passes it, it'll be the home secretary who will be doing of that state. So it'll be a home secretary of Uttar Pradesh or Gujarat who will be doing that review. And there's a very low chance that somebody will pick faults with their own department. And also there is no consequence if this review process does not happen every month. For instance, if they don't meet, what is the consequence? Does the order lapse? No, there's no consequence. So this entire regulation which is on Syog, which has been notified yesterday, may seem to be bringing a high level of accountability, but according to me will only lead to a scaling up, an escalation of online censorship, which is done in secret and without any kind of notice to the people who are impacted, which is the public.
I also want to speak about Zoho. Government of India's email service for around 1.2 million employees has moved to a platform developed by Zoho, and the Ministry of Education has told officials to use Zoho's office suite for official work under the spirit of the Swadeshi movement. What explains this push, and what are the security and privacy concerns around it?
India has always wanted a local software industry in which people can use those actual services and products which are made in India. This has an economic interest, this has a geopolitical interest, but this also has a political interest. The economic interest is there's a local growth of industry, there are more jobs. There's a geopolitical interest because platforms today are power as well. If you have a global platform, let's say if China has TikTok, there is some amount of geopolitical power and tension which emerges from it, or Silicon Valley big tech platforms. But I want to talk a little bit about the political interest here, which I think is an underexplored area of where the government's motivations may be coming from. This is a government which is an openly cultural nativist agenda around Hindu nationalism, and core to its central ideology is homogenizing society and people's ways of living on the basis of what are they seeing on a day-to-day basis, what they're interacting on a day-to-day basis. And this all relies on information exchange. In a digital society, it occurs through digital platforms, like a messaging app, like a social media platform, which is why the government has been so out and about for pushing an adoption of a micro blogging site, which was an alternative to Twitter, which was called Coup, which did not succeed. And now it is again prompting the increased use, not only in the public sector, by people in general, under a larger rubric of Swadeshi and self-reliance of Zoho's messaging app, Atrai. Now, the problem with Atrai is that it is being posed as an alternative to WhatsApp. It was made in 2021 when WhatsApp diluted its privacy policy in terms of use. Side note, IFF contested it in the Competition Commission, which also I think is important in these kind of exchanges to disclose, because quite often people say then you are a proxy for Silicon Valley. We are not. We are a proxy for certain constitutional values. Yeah. We are in fact a direct advocate for them. So here's the thing. I'll go back to it. Now, launched in 2021, it only gathers about 7 million downloads after government union ministers start posting about it, etc. in October of this year. And what is important to consider is that from 2021 to till date, it still does not have technical documentation, how it implements system security, what is its implementation of end-to-end encryption. And if you look at the other alternatives, which are WhatsApp or Signal Corporation, they clearly disclose it alongside what kind of data they keep, what kind of data do they disclose. All you have on Zoho is the absence of technical documentation, public statements on Twitter by its founder, Sridhar Vembu, who keeps saying that, please trust me, our business model is to keep your data safe. But these are assurances which cannot be verified. So beyond the deficiencies, the technical, the document gaps which are there in Atarai, what is also important, and this goes back to my point of ideological affinity of how the government may be choosing certain players or winners, because there are many companies who may be able to develop these same products and services in India. But why is Zoho having this apparent preference from the government towards it? If you look at Sridhar Vembu's repeated statements on Twitter, they show an ideological affinity with the current government, which goes above and beyond the regular statements which are made by industrialists at industry firms like CII and FICCI, right? And this shows, for instance, a ideological affinity which goes a little much more deeply than merely being aligned with the state for your own personal profit. And I think this is something which also needs to be questioned a little much more deeply, because when you look at the procurement, and this goes back to your question, 12 lakh emails being moved, or a suite of office productivity suites, which will be Zoho's alternatives to Google Apps and Google Sheets. And a lot of people say these services work well, by the way. I'm not questioning the usability of these services, but the tendering process which has been done through that appears to be lacking in transparency, because it seems to be varying from existing government policies such as the email policy of 2024, or a procurement policy which requires preference to be given to free and open source software. Because Zoho's stated position is we only make proprietary products, and these proprietary products cannot be open source.
And I think about end-to-end encryption also, they have outright said that they don't have it, they're working on it. But like you said, it's been 4 years since the...
It's been 4 years. It's not a default for messaging. And the problem with a lot of this is if end-to-end encryption is not enabled, then your messages can be read by Zoho.
Yeah.
They are actually.
They are being read. Have you tried the app? Do you use it?
No, I downloaded it, but I didn't get the OTP.
You're not supporting the Swadeshi movement?
No, I try out every application before trying to criticize it. We have a phone, we do it. We have a separate phone. I don't do it on my own phone, because you need to know your subject matter.
Yeah. Definitely. But why are we even developing apps like Zoho, trying to compete with behemoths like Google and doing it poorly? I mean, is India trying to play catch up with tech rather than being first with innovation?
No, innovation works in very, very strange ways. It first works with you making a really, really bad car which does not run, and slowly gaining sophistication on the process of trial and error and user adoption. So I would not blame us for trying to compete with WhatsApp or Signal. But these world standards applications rely on offering a user feature which is called privacy, of reliability. You see it on any kind of messaging or branding which is done by these messaging applications. And they go above and beyond Mark Zuckerberg or the head of WhatsApp saying that, oh, our product is safe, it's privacy friendly. They actually put out the documentation. They file cases against the government. And the government also does not make this any easy. As we have said earlier also, the government has a law in which each message needs to be fingerprinted against the identity of a person who sends it on a internet messaging application. And this has been challenged by WhatsApp in the High Court in Delhi. Well, will Zoho be able to put such a challenge in the High Court of Delhi, or will it comply with such a law which arguably would break end-to-end encryption even if they would implement it? So each message which you send on Atarai, if Zoho is compliant with the law made by the Indian government, which is called the traceability mandate, will be fingerprinted against your identity. And think for a second the kind of messages you send in jest to your friends. Think for a second the kind of messages you receive from your friends in jest, or from your family, or sometime in anger, what you have stated to a friend, or something which has really riled you up that day and you've felt the need to express in a private setting.
We've seen it time and again being misused in courts, being used as evidence. So
yes, even acontextual. It can be completely acontextual. Mere membership itself can place a question on you, and even allegations of being a conspirator to an action in which you are only connected through membership in a WhatsApp group.
yeah. And speaking about end-to-end encryption, Apar, I want to ask you, how much do you think the average Indian cares about things like end-to-end encryption, privacy? Because when you look at something like DigiYatra, we know so many people who are more than happy to use it for convenience, keeping aside the privacy sort of questions that are in play. If you could weigh in on this.
So I think so. A lot of people do use DigiYatra and are open to making a bargain or making that trade against their personal information for usability, for comfort, and that is something which needs to be offered on the basis of a right in which people have continuing ability to demand that how their data is being used. So it's not as if privacy is an absolute. Privacy means that you have a subsisting right in the personal identifiers related to your existence. There are certain fair terms under which businesses can access it. It needs to be linked to that business purpose, should not be exploited, and you should have a continuing level of control over it. Now, the problem with the deployment like DigiYatra was not that it was using facial recognition only. The problem with it was, and you can go far back, was that people did not even know if it was mandatory or it was voluntary. And the kind of sign-ups which were happening, in which there were volunteers who were hired by the DigiYatra Foundation. Should air travel and DigiYatra be restricted to people who only have smartphones? Should it only, you can still see the longer lines at our airports for the manual check-ins which are there. So I would not say that there's been a very enthusiastic or euphoric adoption of DigiYatra. There has been a high level of coercion in its deployment, which is a documented fact, and this is what plagues all the digital deployments by the Indian government today. It is this level of coercion which is breaking trust, in addition to the kind of exclusion these technologies cause, and then their lack of safeguards or alternate ways to access the same thing. And there is, of course, an impact on people due to increased levels of surveillance which occur on people in terms of real world harms who are members of minorities or gender minorities, women, for instance, or people who are part of caste or religious groups which are minorities again. So I would say Indians care about their privacy. In fact, the Policing in India survey shows that people who are from the lower socioeconomic stratas of Indian society care about it more. But it may be not be articulated as the word privacy. It may be articulated in different words. Cyber security. It may be articulated in different ways. Dabav, which is pressure. So people may not understand privacy as the Supreme Court may have articulated it, autonomy, dignity, liberty, but they feel it in their bones the way they live on a daily basis. See, the thing is that you can't expect us to be a digital utopia when most of your population is in a precarious situation, really a precarious. Per capita income is at a very low standard itself. And you can't expect that people will be having MacBooks and they'll be having iPhones and they'll be technically sophisticated. And especially with public services, the stated ambition of DigiYatra is not to be even restricted to airports. Its CEO says they want to implement it on bus stations and bus stops and train stations. So there's a wider ambition there. But I doubt, once you step beyond the business class and the premium economy, and if there are studies and if there's data they can put out, how many people in business class, premium economy and economy use it? I would bet you that a higher percentage of the business class and premium economy travelers use it. It's linked to the socioeconomic circumstance of a human being.
Definitely. Apar, I know we briefly touched upon the Twitter case and you don't want to speak much about it, but if I can ask you what message it could be giving other big tech companies for challenging the government orders, if that's something you could.
See, I'm not going to comment on that case, so I'm going to extrapolate on the basis of what I've seen as strategic litigation over a longer period of time. Tech companies today don't want to litigate and challenge the government at all. They are what may be best termed as frenemies. They are constantly negotiating power with each other. The platforms want continued market access to India because it is a very large base of users they can cite in their Securities Exchange Commission SEC filings to show a massive number of users which are there on their platform. So they need to be in India. The government of India knows this, but the government of India also knows that they can't kick out these large big tech platforms due to geopolitical reasons, its ongoing trade negotiations with the United States, but also because a large number of people rely on these platforms. The engine of the Indian economy in many ways is in some part fueled by what is there on WhatsApp, what is there on Facebook, what is there on Instagram. So there will be a massive impact which will upend them. Until you do that, you need to create alternatives, which goes back to the Zoho conversation. So there can be greater political control for your cultural vision. Now, the issue is that platforms also know that they have so if you look at what was there, let's say prior to 2014, 2012, it's not like the platforms were not compliant with Indian law. They were much more open to challenging the government on free speech concerns. Now, in the Syog portal, for instance, none of the platforms except X have challenged it. No industry association has challenged it. And I would say that this is not only about the platforms. There has also been a professionalization and corporatization of policy dialogues, which were, I think so, about a decade ago, much more premised in constitutional rights, civil liberties, social justice, and more today towards market impacts, public policy choices, and what kind of regulation may be bringing in phrases like guardrails, etc. Things. I'm not ascribing any kind of judgment there. So what should a person take away from this? Platforms and the government enjoy a relationship. This is a relationship which is complex. It is layered. It is like there has been a dependency between two entities, two persons. So they can't completely decouple from each other, yet they're negotiating all the time. The government is the larger partner here. It can make laws, it can issue directions, and the platforms to a large extent will resist it if it goes against its business interests, but will largely go along with it. And this is what has been occurring over a long period of time, and it's been increasing as a trend more and more.
This year, we've seen a lot of clampdown on online speech, apart from takedown notices during Operation Sindoor to the controversy with Kunal Kamra, India's Got Latent, and of course, YouTube copyright strikes. How do you see this pattern of increasing content regulation?
So I think the pattern of increasing content regulation comes from two or three larger factors. The first is that there's been a massive increase in the mobile teleconnectivity in India, and also a lot of people now rely on social media as well as electronic, any kind of digital media much more deeply as they were doing earlier. In fact, the Lokniti CSDS survey prior to the 2024 election shows that, in fact, a lot of people formulate their electoral preferences on the basis of WhatsApp, YouTube, etc. So I think there's a real political interest for regulation, and there's also a social interest, which is a streak of moral conservatism which is there in our society. Again, comes from a Hindu nationalistic, casteist kind of view of society. Ye ganda hai, this is pure, this is impure, etc. This is obscene, this is not obscene. So this is why there have also been demands of, the youth of this country is losing its direction, is not being able, is not working as much as it should be working, because it's distracted by all this kind of lewd jokes, depravity, smut, etc., things like that. Now, there may be real mental impacts due to the use of social media on a person's self-esteem, etc. But this is not framed as it. It's framed as a demand for a censor board for the internet. And I think so between these two big forces, there is also some interests of national security, wanting to make sure that our neighboring countries are not able to run influence operations and misinformation. So when you have these large interests, a political interest, a social conservatism interest, and a security interest, you will keep seeing movements towards the use of the escalating use of existing laws for censorship as well as proposals for news laws. This is what the broadcasting bill was about, which was proposing that every online creator, especially digital news creators who have these YouTube channels like Ravish Kumar, would need to register with the government ministry just like a television channel. This is why yesterday the Syog portal was legally reinforced by amendments to the IT rules. So it's both actions which are being taken, like the one we were mentioning of 6,000, 8,000 Twitter handles being blocked, and us only getting to know because Twitter gave us those aggregate numbers.
Yeah, and we had no transparency.
No transparency. During that time, about 16 platforms, 16 news platforms reached out to IFF and we offered them pro bono legal assistance. So this kind of censorship which is happening, really, I think so, is instilling a level of fear in society. People self-censor a whole lot today because they worry not only about the legal consequences of what may happen, they also fear social exclusion and targeting today.
Yeah, and we've seen that play out time and again. During Operation Sindoor, we saw a huge rise in misinformation and disinformation, and PIB fact-checking. PIB's fact-check posted a lot of fact-checks, but the government's proposed fact-checking unit has been widely criticized, and we've seen social media platforms pulled out of the misinformation, disinformation work in the US. How do you see this play out?
So, I would say that the recalibration of US-based platforms is on the basis of them being opportunistic and wanting to realign their policy positions as there has been a greater amount of power which has been gained by the by the right-wing forces in the United States, especially Donald Trump, the accusations by the Republican Party that they have been partisan and against them. So fact-checking was seen as a way in which woke ideologies and left-leaning progressive politics were used to censor voices which were in favor of free expression. Now, I do not agree with this. I think fact-checking is something which needed to be supported by platforms. It's a problem they have created quite often because their tools itself facilitate a large amount of hate speech and incorrect facts are eating at the foundations of societies which are built on the basis of common values. This is good, that is bad. And I don't mean prescription in the way of prescribing for things which should be led to individuals, but let's say killing is bad, hurting somebody physically is bad, though hate speech is bad against a community. Those kind of things are not free speech. They have been recognized as crimes, and that has emerged on the basis of an experience from world wars and the Holocaust. So you can't argue against that. Now, the pullback from fact-checking itself has now presented an opportunity to governments itself to get into the fact-checking business. It's not only being done by the union government or is only a BJP project. Tamil Nadu does it, Karnataka does it. And the problem with this is that when you make a fact-checking unit, there will be a level of enforcement which comes alongside it, which will also allow the government to mandate a takedown. So there's nothing wrong, according to me, if the government says that we think that this report about the roads which are broken in this locality is false and incorrect. The picture which you have shown is actually 2 years old. I don't think so there's anything wrong with that, because the residents there and a larger conversation can result, and journalistic function can also check those claims, as has happened with the PIB. The problem was that, again, under the IT rules, and we keep coming back to the IT rules because the IT rules are like a buffet in which the menu is added again and again, and the government can eat whatever it wants, how long it wants. So under the IT rules, it had put in an amendment which was struck down by the Bombay High Court as unconstitutional, which was called the fact-checking amendment. This allowed the government not only to fact-check, not only PIB to say what is accurate, what is factful, and what is false and misleading. It also allowed with the government on such a determination to then issue a takedown order. That very determination that this is fake, false, and misleading could allow the government to remove that and scrub it off the internet. So in case that road was not broken, it actually was in case the road was actually broken and that picture was not 2 years old, nobody could join a larger conversation and contest it. That's the problem. And you have different models of fact check units which are there in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and there's some problems with them as well, but they do not have these powers for takedowns. Karnataka was piloting a misinformation bill. We did criticize it again because again we thought that the kind of sanctions which came from it in terms of censorship or potential criminal prosecution would be disproportionate.
Do you think this perception of fact checking is a woke leftist agenda? It exists in India also?
So I'll own up to my politics. I believe in progressive values, and I think there's sufficient empirical evidence that that nationalistic tropes, right-wing forces, quite often make claims which are not documented, which are not historically established properly, and they need to weaken the foundations of what is truth and what has been a documented piece of history and inject a greater level of subjectivity, shake its foundations. And then the more they are able to shake it, the more they are able to question your sense of reality, your values, which is very important to them as to how they build a movement. I think this exists in India. One of the words which is used with a very high level of frequency by the Indian right wing and is also used by the government now is narrative. So there is even if there is a fact, there will be a factual narrative, which means that there needs to be mythologization, there needs to be a storytelling, which needs to be accompanying a set of facts. And I agree, context is important, but here myth making is much more important. So I do agree it exists in the Indian right wing. I think even in Operation Sindoor, after several of the claims which were exaggerated, which were made by many people who were speaking on behalf of the Indian government, and there are ways you can show your patriotism. I showed my patriotism. I support the armed forces, but there was an active attempt at misinformation as to them having information of what kind of armaments, what kind of troop movements, what kind of damage was being inflicted on Pakistan. And later on, there was, instead of a mea culpa, there was almost a shamelessness in which they said that this was a psychological operation. This was a psyop. We were engaging in misinformation purposely to weaken the morale of the enemy, which seemed completely counterproductive because when you do it on a platform like Twitter, your audience is not only the people in India. It is people all over the world who are interested in ground reports and facts from the people who are witnessing this conflict in real time. So you are basically undermining the credibility of the word of the people of India on a longer timeline. So I think so there is an actual problem with fact checking with the Indian right wing, and they manifest it also because they need to shake the foundations of reality, and quite often they also engage in instances of hate speech. This is also why they say they are free speech, they support free speech absolutism, they support free speech in XYZ, but they don't. They support hate speech quite often.
I want to also speak about another big talking point of digital advocacy and privacy in India this year, which was the Digital Personal Protection Act, which is being seen by many as a tool for state surveillance rather than citizen protection. What is your reading on it? You have, written and given interviews about this extensively, but if you could tell us a little about your reading and how this will impact journalistic work.
So, on the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, one needs to consider that a lot of the details there are absent. Because a lot of it is being left to what is called as delegated legislation or the rules. These rules are not yet formulated, so one does not know their scope and how will it be applicable. But one thing which is very prominent is that there is the absence of any kind of journalistic exemption. Now, what is a journalistic exemption? Whenever you gather any kind of details in your reporting about any person, their name, their address, you essentially include personally identifiable information about that person in your report. However, in most data protection statutes, there's an exception, and even in the up to the 2023 drafts of the data protection law in India as it was being proposed, there were exemptions which were present for journalists. When you gather a news report which is published in public interest, you can make these disclosures. You do not need to seek consent of people who may be involved in an incident, because then it leads to very absurd consequences in which people may not give you that consent. So you can't report on, let's say, an accident. You can't report on a instance of political corruption because the very person who's accused of it may not give you consent. Now, the absence of this exemption, of the journalistic exemption under Indian Data Protection Act, makes it potentially opens up any journalist to prosecution under it. The Press Club of India actually organized joint signatures by several press clubs and I think thousands of journalists. And the response by the Ministry of Electronics and IT was that before we notify the rules and make this law operational, we will address your questions through a FAQ, a frequently asked questions dossier, which would not in any way, I think so, make it better because it can't change the law. But even this FAQ has not come till now, and it's been a few months. So again, one should question what the DPDPA will do. Will it protect people and their privacy, or will it protect the government and public officials from scrutiny and from by potentially bringing the press within its ambit?
Speaking of privacy, it's been 8 years of the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment that affirmed the right to privacy. How has this right evolved from then to now, according to you?
So the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, which was given in August 2017, was a very important landmark point in which the Supreme Court reaffirmed the fundamental right to privacy. It did so by stating that what is the privacy doctrine. We have seen the fundamental right to privacy being actively applied in areas of public law which have been developed around gender, sexuality, access. However, I would be, I think so, not unfair in my comment if I would say that it has not been as actively applied by our courts. It's not as if people have not filed cases on issues when it's questioned the core of executive power, such as state surveillance, Pegasus. It has not been applied, for instance, in issues of the lack of any underlying legal basis for mass surveillance measures like facial recognition. So the privacy doctrine remains an unfulfilled promise. It remains a thing which needs to be acted upon through the practice and through the judgments of our high courts and the Supreme Court. And I do hold that hope.
Yeah. You mentioned facial recognition, and that is something that we've seen building the infrastructure in many cities. There's also been Aadhaar, Quint. India has really been building a so-called digital infrastructure. Do you see India becoming a surveillance state?
I don't think so that the digital infrastructure which we are building makes us a surveillance state. I think so it's much more of a form of authoritarianism, because it's not just surveillance. It's just not the state wanting to know what you do. It's the state wanting you to be a certain way, which it wants to prescribe through certain choices and it wants to restrict to some other. And it's not within the purview of the constitution how they are wanting to do it. They are wanting it to be homogenized as per what an ideal Indian should be. And there has been a comic of Adarsh Balak, wakes up on time, eats your food at 1 p.m. for lunch, blesses your parents, touches their feet, etc. It wants a society such as that, which is a dystopian society. It's not a well-ordered society. So when you mention Quint, which is the vaccination platform, what happens to the people who didn't have smartphones? What happens to the people who had smartphones with a higher level of digital connectivity than the others? What happens to the people in a shared household where only the oldest male member had the smartphones when the slots were limited at the height of COVID? And the regression analysis, empirical data has shown that more upper caste, upperly economic men got vaccinated first than women. So what would be the impact then on mortality?
Yeah.
Or you think about the other deployments which are being done again and again. For instance, if you look at DigiYatra, the data had leaked once. There was coercion which was built. In Aadhaar, even today, there are repeated instances of exclusions being done. For instance, look at the Ladki Behna scheme in Maharashtra. Women are being excluded under an election promise scheme in which they were at the margins of society. Women who are Dalits, who are tribals, they were offered, they were told that they would get monthly money, but this is now dependent on an OTP which goes to a male relative in their family, as well as facial authentication. Same is the outcome in the Poshan app, where facial recognition has been made mandatory. So I will say that the state is becoming more and more exclusionary. It is becoming more and more coercive. So it is just not about surveillance. It is about a form of authoritarianism in which there's a fragility in our lives, and only the most privileged, the most economically mobile, the ones who have the highest level of privilege in our society get to enjoy this technology and this cool tech which is being built.
Yeah. India also still leads the world in internet shutdowns. What do you think this says about the government's views on digital rights and dissent?
So the issue with internet shutdowns is, and what people need to understand is that it's a disproportionate exercise of censorship power. Because the internet shutdown can be done in an entire district, and it can be done again and again. And there's not been a meaningful intervention beyond transparency by our courts on that. So yes, internet shutdown orders do need to be published, but the government can publish basically any order for any reasons, or even just cyclo-style those orders and just change the details with respect to when does it start, when does it end. And we've seen that in Manipur, and we saw that in Ladakh, and we saw that in other regions of our country as well. In Manipur, for instance, one would be shocked to know that it's not as if the internet shutdown was there only for a month. It was extending 4 months. So it's not about Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. It's not about Manipur. It's about the people who are living there. What happens to the 4 million people in Manipur? Most of them in many districts who did not access to the internet. Now think about it. It's not about them watching Netflix. It's about the people. It's about the children there who at the same point in time may need to sit for a competitive exam, or may need to do remote coaching, or it may be about a person who needs to send money back home or needs to receive money. Or it may be, so all of these services, or the gig economy, everything crashes. And again, did the information blackout, and I've written so much about it in Manipur, result in a sense of normalcy? No, it does not. Because internet shutdowns quite often prevent others from getting to know what's happening there. Also prevent people from documenting and asking from accountability from excesses of the state. But at the same point in time, keeps the underlying issue, which in Manipur was a sense of distrust and hostility between two communities, which had unfortunately arisen, from continuing. That still remains. Hence, the violence still remains. It's not the internet shutdown which is going to solve it.
How you see India's digital governance evolving, and what is the broad story that you're seeing unfold?
I think the broad story which we are seeing unfold is of a lack of empathy which is there in our digital story. Over the past decade, we have been fairly exuberant in our claim of being expanding digital market. This has been on the back, and genuinely on the back of the tremendous increase in the number of people who have mobile internet connections, which have gone from, let's say, about 80, 100 million to about, I think, so 960 million, something odd like that. But this number has stagnated. This number is number of connections. It means a person like me can have 4 connections, but a working family, only the male member may have 1 mobile internet connection. It's not growing. So what it means is that the number of people who are coming online is decreasing in percentage terms, which means there will be a continuing and sticky exclusion of people from the ability of social mobility, which is based on when you get to access the internet. That's one. And so they will not be able to participate in this digital economy. The second is state systems, which are being made with digital tools. They're supposed to instill a high level of efficiency, transparency, or good governance. Quite often we've seen these to be questionable claims. The platforms seem to be offline, when there is a peak demand. COVID itself was offline for a long period of time, for 1 month. People still needed it to generate certificates for their travel. The national transgender portal was offline for a long period of time. So this infrastructure which we are building digitally as well, the same sense which is there with our physical infrastructure, that yes, it's shiny, it's new, but it's broken, or there's something wrong with it. There's some deficiency in it. Conditions apply. I think so. That's something which is there. And third, I do think so. Technology is being used more and more, not only in India but globally, to consolidate power centralization, because there are larger issues in society of wealth inequality, of people also not being able to, like, there's such a, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and technology is a method both for economic and political control globally today. So I think so people's civil liberties, social justice is in question. Now, this is not to say technology cannot be used for good. It is not to say that, let's say, for instance, an organization like us who does its primary fundraising online can't do it like that. It's not like these visions are not possible, but we have to go beyond thinking of binary frames of utopia and dystopia and look at the lived reality of the people in India and how they access the internet, how they access technology. And here there are large question marks. We have to go beyond sloganeering, bombast. And I think so here the India story is a little much more complicated. I hope this pessimism I'm indicating turns out to be wrong. But over the next decade, I do see challenges which are there, which were not present in the earlier decade.